morning. My name is Barbi Brown. I am the Director of Policy and Practice with Tennessee Higher Education Initiative. Thank you, thank you. I've been in this space since late 2006, early 2007. First as a student beginning with an associate program, moving into a bachelor program, leaving prison with a bachelor degree in professional studies from a HEP program. 2 years after, in 2020, after stalking THEI properly, I was hired in 2020 as a reentry coordinator. A couple of years ago, moved up to this arena as Director of Policy. So what do I do as Director of Policy? That is a very good question. And if you have an answer, please help me organize all of these things. But one of the main goals of policy and practice is one, as Molly talked about, relationship building. We must be a community to do this work. We can't do this work in silos. We also do some technical assistance around Tennessee's Pell runway. And we can talk about this later. This came from Tennessee's statewide coalition, this design to ensure that there are guardrails in light of Pell reinstatement so that we don't have bad actors coming into the scene in Tennessee. And also, this is absolutely a shareable system. So not just Tennessee, we want to protect every state and every student in this arena. So those are some of the things that we do. We also govern not only the statewide coalition, but the regional coalition, Southern HEP Collective, that covers the 14 southeastern states. Hey, there she goes. If you have never heard of the Southern HEP Collective and you are in the southeastern corner of the United States, you should. Please let me give you my card, or hit up Stephanie Gaskell or Terry Irwin or anyone else from the Southern HEP Collective. We will make sure to get you involved. With that, I don't want to take up all the time, but we have, so much to talk about in light of yesterday's events and just the field in general. Thank you all for coming.
First of all, can I just say how wonderful it is to be in community with you all? For just kudos to Molly and Ascendium and to everybody waking up yesterday and hopping on multiple planes. It's wonderful to be in community with you. So I'm Erin, Castro. I'm at the University of Utah, and I thought, well, what are we going to talk about for the Pell of it all today? And so I thought I would take us back to the basics a bit, because I do feel like this information is important. I'm a professor, I'm a researcher, and I've studied the use of Pell ever since it started, back when it was the Educational Opportunity Grant. So this is a little bit of policy nerding out. We have the 1965 Higher Ed Act. This is a pretty profound piece of legislation for this country, and it is the source of Pell Grant funding. In 1972, we saw just a small name change, but nothing structurally changing. And then in 1980, we got another name change. What I think is not reported much is that in 1992, we see specific legislation requiring supplementing instead of supplanting. What does that mean? Well, when Pell became available, what we saw was a decrease in state funding for correctional education then, because Pell was available. We see the exact same thing happening now. And so what they tried to do legislatively in 1992 is to say, wherever your baseline is for state funding, you cannot dip below that. You can add Pell on top of that, but we're not essentially going to supplant your state investments. That didn't last long. In 1992, we also saw discrimination against people with long sentences and life sentences. And I think this is important to point out, because this is all in the early 90s, right? And so you have not a ton of attention coming, and then you have this attention coming specifically targeting particular people with sentences. And then in 1994, we see the prohibition. So I'm sharing that just to kind of put the Pell of it all in context. Thanks to Molly for the title. A couple other things just to know. The Pell Grant is a first dollar fund, and I've seen just some general confusion about this. And essentially what that means is that if you're a college student and you are eligible, Pell funds will get applied first to your cost of attendance. And so this idea that you could scholarship a student and save their Pell that's not how it works in higher ed. If they're eligible for Pell, those funds have to be applied first, and then you can scholarship them. And we can certainly talk about not applying for Pell. Eligibility does require an application, and so in order to access Pell, you have to fill out the federal FAFSA, which Sheila's going to chat about, right? Most public institutions in the United States require for any scholarships that students fill out the FAFSA. Now, there are some caveats here. We have states that don't require it because they essentially have a state-based FAFSA form, right? And this oftentimes, at least in Utah, will help with folks who are non-US citizens. It's an important move, but not every state has this. We also see private institutions. When we did our Pell research, there was roughly 50% of private institutions pulling Pell. That is going to change. It's going to change because Pell is first dollar. And so part of what I wanted to just point out today is that there are a couple really big important implications from this. The first is that if you become a PEP, almost all of your funding will be through Pell, if students are eligible. On the other hand, you're applying for FAFSA. And then I think given that, equity around Pell remains a serious concern. We know that outside of prisons, Black students are consistently the highest recipients of the Pell Grant. Our early research is indicating that that's not happening inside prisons. So back to the guardrail question, addressing that. Teacher, how much more time do we have? Okay.
You see me looking at you?
Yes. So let me just share a few highlights of what we know right now, and I imagine my colleague Allan will probably share a bit more, but what we know from the research is that currently incarcerated people do not have access to timely, accurate information about federal student aid to make informed, timely decisions. And so through some of our research, here are a few things that we know that are aligned with best practices in the field that we can do. We can, first of all, advocate for what students need. In our research, what we have found is that the biggest detriment to accessing information is general deference to corrections. This idea that, we can't possibly have people access computers, or we can't do that. And I would like to, in community with everyone else, strongly encourage you to ask. And if it's not you, encourage your financial aid officer to do it. Because there are accreditation requirements tied to whether or not students can access this critical information in a timely manner. Go inside and meet with the students, and this is your director of financial aid. They learned that at the convening, right? Directly interact with students, and even if you are remote programs, get inside the facility so that you can see what is happening. I will end, not here, I will end and just say that Pamela Capastoro, Dr. Capastoro over here, we are standing up a national center at the University of Utah to help answer some of these questions and to produce empirical work on this field. Who incarcerated students are, how they fare, in which pathways, what happens afterward, what are the outcomes, what are the impacts, similar to other students throughout higher education. And so her and I are here today, and we'd love to connect. And I'll stop.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So actually, Sheila is up next.
Thanks for that. And, no, I'm serious though. Okay. Without the research in the field, it's very hard to make the arguments. It is, and so the intentional focus on researching is, it contributes to those of us even trying to advocate for policy changes, because otherwise it's my opinion versus my data, so I very much appreciate that. I'm Sheila Meiman. I am the person at the National Association for Student Financial Aid Administrators who focuses on PEPs. And NAFSA is a membership organization, so in the colleges, all of the financial aid people are members of NAFSA. They fund us as an organization to exist to provide one, policy direction and advocacy, and two, technical assistance and education to the field. And from a PEP perspective, we have been trying to do both areas. So we focus on policy, which is something we do pretty quietly. That's not a broadly advertised thing. But for instance, the FAFSA that's now out in paper, which many of our students are obliged to use, has a comma that the online one does not. And I call this a significant comma because if that comma is there, the way it is in the paper FAFSA, a person who's incarcerated is not necessarily considered independent. But the online one that everyone else out there could use does make you so. So we point things out like that to Ed. Yes, we are the kind of people who count commas. Financial aid, right? Nerdy, detail. So we do a ton of commenting to the Department of Education on things that we view as not working, which those comments are always public, but we don't necessarily advertise them, but we have been working extensively with them on things that are broken as this process has been rolling through. Financial aid for prison education programs was brought online at the same time they did this little thing called FAFSA simplification, which basically broke all of financial aid in America. And so the Department of Education, particularly at the working level, has been working very hard to make things work generally in America. And that has, I think, distracted them a bit from focusing on some of the prison education stuff. But we're finally turning a bit of a corner on that. And some of the craziness is starting to settle down, and they're starting to look at prison education programs more deliberately and with the intent of actually approving them, moving things forward. They had to build their own processes in the Department of Education to understand how to review the applications coming in. They got the first few, then they changed the system that they used to let people apply, and it didn't work for months. And that finally got fixed. And then just last month, they completely redid what the application looks like. In fact, they took the application away and said, financial aid director, you can just type it all in raw. It'll be fine. You don't need to attach an application. And which, sent me into a, I think I have charts. I pretty much ignore charts, I'm sorry. But this process of applying, it takes a village for real on your campus. There are things you are not going to expect when you apply to be a PEP. And it's not because it's a PEP. It's because it's the first time you're touching this new system with new rules and new information. And to be able to put a PEP application in, you're going to need your academics involved on campus intimately, because they're going to have to provide some information beyond just the nice paragraph describing the program. You're going to need to have your executives, because you're going to need all kinds of private information. You're going to need your president's home number, email, and address. You know how pleasant they are when you ask for that? Good to have your provost sitting there and make them do that. You're going to need to have your PEP team for all kinds of details, including information about who's in charge in each prison you're looking to go to, how to contact them, who's another person at the prison and how you contact them, exactly what all the services you're going to offer will be, lots and lots of information. There are attachments that have to be created to go along with this application, but they're not all one attachment, one big document with attachments. It's completely restructured. finally, you're going to need partners. If you are going to use any community-based organizations or other organizations, you're going to need information from them and attachments from them. And so I actually went through the process of applying as a PEP on the system with a college about a week and a half ago. And it's not a massive college, but it has a pretty significant prison education program. And I was sitting there with their financial aid director, who's one of the most experienced in the field, their provost, who is brilliant, and the vice president that manages the prison education program. And 3.5 hours later, we hit submit. We had 75 errors. We cried, we drank. And then we figured out a lot. The good news is, by going through that miserable time, I have the data now to create a document to explain exactly what you're going to face when you open that application. When you do an EAP, only the financial aid person at your school, there's only one that'll have this special little cool token. It's very nerdy. They give you a token, and you have to keep it real safe, and you get to type it in when you log in. They're the only ones who can submit your PEP application. And when they do it, they're going to see for the first time through that they have to take every single program and every single location in the college and add information about each of those. They're going to need to create SOC. Do you know what SIP and SOC codes are? Your programs all have SIP codes, which are the information about the program of study. You're now going to have SOC codes, which are the codes that describe the occupations that those programs of study could go through for everything in your college, not just the PEP. The PEP stuff worked easily. You have to provide tons of information, your board of directors, when each of them started, when each of your executives started, where they live, it's incredibly detailed. When that gets submitted, the Department of Education and the PEP team get notified, because you're also going to send them an email and say, I sent my PEP application in an EAP. They've figured out how to review them, which is pretty cool. They now know how to look at them and decide. And I think we're seeing that this is a big step. This really is. Yes, that's the good news. They're looking at them. Do you know how?
High bar for the
But some people put them in, and Nolly, you're here, right? Yeah. Nolly put one in the old system, and then they ignored it. She's like, 4 months later, is anyone going to look? No, resubmit. Then months and months and months. They have used some of you early adopters to learn how to look at these, and they're starting to flow with approvals, which is great. And they've shown a willingness, if there's something a little wrong or they have a question, of contacting you and saying, could you tweak this little thing? Which is great. That's also a sign of partnering, so I'm very pleased about that. When they're done with it and they've approved it, a contract called the Program Participation Agreement, which doesn't get adjusted very often with a college, comes back, your president signs it, Department of Education signs it, they create an ECAR, which is an eligibility report, and then you can start actually looking to work with your students on processing aid. And now, one thing that programs may not know is when you are approved, let's say you get approved next March or April, sometime later in the spring semester with a PEP, you can administer aid for all of spring semester. If you're within the payment period for your approval, you can administer aid, and you can actually disperse it. You can have students complete their FAFSAs before you are approved. That's fine. And then you can start looking at the world of reporting, which we're not going to talk about, because that gives me a headache. But the good news is things are starting to flow, and I think we are going to see a groundswell of PEPs confirmed in the next 6 to 9 months.
Thank you. I feel like that should have been a YouTube video on telling all of us how to do this, because it's a lot. And, when you think about financial aid, just in my roles in institutions, because of the level of compliance, it's so hard to then focus on the customer service piece of what you do. So as you were saying that, I'm like, okay, but school has already started. How does this impact the students? And so that level of frustration, but I appreciate you sharing that, because a lot of people don't know some of the ins and outs of that and the struggle. They just know that they have not been packaged yet. So thank you. All right, Allan.
I'm gonna follow Barbie's lead a little bit here, because my being in this space, while technically only about 6 years, it really began around 2008, sitting in prison in the state of Michigan, at a point in my life where I'm trying to figure out what am I gonna do with the rest of my life and the direction I'm going in. What do they have to offer me? And that was nothing, right? That was that moment of realization of there's nothing here. They have nothing to offer. There's no programs, no college. I then I get released and try to figure out how to navigate the world on my own and with the support of some key individuals in my life. Went back to college, got a couple degrees, started a nonprofit that's entirely led by formerly incarcerated people, doing state level advocacy work. And then around 2018 was following the formerly incarcerated college graduates network, shout out, ficgn.org, please sign up, please donate. And if you want to know more, Terrell and Haja are here, they can tell you more. But I was following them on Facebook and saw this opportunity open up at Vera, at the Vera Institute. And it was about policy advocacy work. There was a campaign going on to restore Pell, and it was like, this is perfect for me because it's going to bring something to people that I never had access to, and that was really appealing to me. And so I've been doing that for 6 years now, and doing that means I'm now a program manager. I help lead all of our technical assistance work across the country. Molly's map had 22 states on it, but it's really 50, and Puerto Rico, because Ascendium supports the work at Vera that we've done to help restore Pell, to help provide technical assistance to all of the colleges that have participated in the Second Chance Pell and now the PEPs, and all of the corrections departments across the country. So we've worked in all 50 states literally, and the FBOP. They want the F in front of there now. It's very important. And Puerto Rico. So that map is really bigger than that, and really appreciate that support from Ascendium. Erin was prompting me to say something positive. There is, right? So I mean, it's good to remember that we do have about 150 Second Chance Pell institutions that are on the pathway to be PEPs. They've committed to becoming PEPs. They're still on that pathway. They've made it through the first milestone, are working on the second milestone. And so while the PEP applications have had some kinks and are starting to now roll out, we have those 150. We're about 17 months out from implementation of the law, and we have officially 10, but we know of about 10 more, so about 20 PEPs that have been approved, and there are probably 20 or 30 more really close on that pipeline. So I think that by, that 2-year mark, maybe June of next year, we could be looking at, a couple hundred colleges if you include the 150 Second Chance Pell. So there's some positive stuff. I'll stop there because I see my moderator looking at me.
Y'all have to stop calling me out, please.
No, we need it.
So we've mentioned some barriers as you all were sharing information from where you sit in this space. But what are some of the other barriers that you're seeing institutions having? So, I've been working with a lot of institutions with the financial aid part of it, and we know that that's been a major challenge. But what are some of the other barriers that you all are seeing in the space?
Yes, financial aid is a barrier. I think one of the things that I'm seeing through leading Tennessee's Pell Runway is there's not a link between program leaders and their financial aid administrators. So that conversation, those connections that Sheila talks about earlier with the administration of the college or university you're dealing with is very important. Sometimes we can see applications or have discussions where it's kind of obvious that the program leader is not up on PEP, not, Lord have mercy, all of the pages and all of the things and all of the Sheila Meimans and Dr. Castros. Program administrators aren't necessarily held to that barrier, to that line, but there's a lot to know. So making those connections with definitely your financial aid administrator is paramount, and those who will be providing student services on the inside, because that's a different look, right? So we need to have those conversations first off. I think we're also seeing kind of a bottleneck at the accreditation level. Well, first, I do have to mention that I have heard that let's not call out TDOC, let's call DOCs, that the DOC application is bottlenecking some states, right? I will say about Tennessee's application, it is robust, but there's a purpose. We kind of foresaw that there may be a bottlenecking at the second and third levels. So what we have done with Tennessee's application is to ensure that the criteria that we know that SAC-COC is going to need is already included in Tennessee's Pell Runway. With SAC-COC, programs are obligated to have an MOU with DOCs prior to going toward that SAC-COC accreditation, right? So we wanted to ensure that within that MOU, things have already been accomplished that we have verification from SAC-COC that they're going to need. So we've tried to, in this process, break down some of that bottlenecking and make it as seamless as possible. From the student perspective, if I can, may I? Thank you. From the student perspective a little bit, we all talk about PEPs and we use technical words to talk about it, and sometimes when Sheila talks, I have to Google things. So the real question is from students. Students are saying, okay, what is Pell? What the Pell is this? Molly, check, gotcha, girl. What is Pell? How is this gonna affect me in my program, which I've been in for years as a second chance Pell recipient? Or my program has not dealt with any financial aid and have been doing this solo the entire time. Thus, I've never seen a FAFSA. So from the student perspective, what do I need to know as a student? What do I have the right to know as a student? And what do I need to be able to digest in my college pathway to better prepare myself for this, right? So one of the programs that THEI, through the beautiful funding of Ascendium, is called Navigating Forward, and this is a play on our reentry guide, which is called Moving Forward. So Navigating Forward is the next step in our Forward series. Keep an eye out. I don't know what the next will be, but we have something coming forward. Navigating Forward is a set of those student-facing resources. Now, does this replace the financial aid info that's coming from NASFA? No. And if you haven't seen those documents, very informative. Does this replace any financial aid coming from the U.S. Department of Aid? No. What this does is translate those documents and all of that technicalities into something that students can utilize immediately. So, for instance, if I don't know to ask for for my student services, for assistance, for tutoring, if I don't know that that's an opportunity, I'm not going to ask for it. If I don't know that I have the option to retake a class that I didn't do so well in, then I'm not going to ask for it. So these Navigating Forward documents, which I believe time frame are set to pilot in spring of 2025 and to come out full force in fall of 2025 that's the timeline, in both hard copy formats, digital format, and then a course syllabus, a course framework is being created for those who do have access inside for this information. But this gives students the knowledge and the power to be able to take into their own control their college experience while they are on the inside. So this is very relevant because students, again, best interest determination that is based around students. So why should we not have students very involved in their own college careers?
So you mentioned SAC-COC, which is one accrediting body. Who else is working with institutions under other accreditors? Okay. Want to speak to that?
Just kidding. Is your question more about like what that experience is?
Yes.
Is anybody here from an accrediting body? Okay, all right, good to know. I should have read that list
This
more.
is a safe space.
Okay, well, so our regional accreditors are doing, I believe, the absolute best that they can given their resources and their brand new charge. So I'll first say that. Our University of Utah is under review, and I've sat on a few panels for the Northeast. And so my understanding of the process, like our process out west, is quite different from HLC's process. The questions are different. The threshold of the answers are different. So there's not a ton of, there's similarities, but there's not a ton of standardization. And I think there's a common perception that if a program and institution is accredited, that it is therefore high quality. And I think I would just invite everyone here to be curious about that assumption, because accreditation is compliance oriented. And you can be in compliance and also do some things that aren't super great. So I think we, in the accreditors that I've worked with, everybody is trying to do their best. So I would say, at least in my experience, folks are open to understanding how to be better. And so if you are asked to serve as a panelist for review, I would strongly encourage you to do so. Not only just to learn, but to also be present in this community to help support really high quality programs.
I know I'm listening to you and I'm saying, you know, if we would just be as empathetic to our learners as we want people to be empathetic to us, it would be a wonderful world. Sheila, you wanted to share?
We're doing sort of challenges, right? Okay. I think I see a couple. One, to me, is schools at the executive level really embracing early conversations about how they can create and structure their own internal funding mechanisms to support PEP programs properly. As with any program a college offers, you have to be able to demonstrate you have the administrative capability to offer that program. That's an essential compliance issue. And these programs have to be administratively, they have to be substantially similar to what's offered on campus. And so colleges need to very early on think about ways to use their own accounting structures, et cetera, to make sure that these programs are properly supported and not resource-starved. Because if you create a resource-starved program, you're going to burn out the people who care, who are working on it. You are not going to provide the high quality that you need to have. And you're going to start to very quickly look like you're trying to create a profit center from these students. So it's very important, I think, as we go forward, that we start to make sure colleges are having those conversations about their own internal funding and structuring for these programs. It's doable, but it takes some thought, and it looks different depending on the accounting model in the school. I think the other challenge that I'm looking at right now is making sure we find new and creative pathways to work with students who are in default, because that world, it's been changing pretty much weekly. I mean, I'm tired of reading the new announcements about who did what in what court every week and redoing my documents. But especially given the situation we are in right now, how we are going to work with those students and give them pathways to participate in education when they are in a position that may prevent them from it. So we're keeping an eye on that with a lot of policy things right now, but I think that's going to be a challenge because there is still a group of students that without direct philanthropic funds to support their education haven't been able to participate, and they have no way of getting themselves out of debt. And so that loop is not something we can let sustain itself.
So Sheila, it's interesting that you mentioned the philanthropic side of this. And I'm going to be coming to you, Allan, because I just know too much about what you do, right? But what I would say as somebody who has worked over 30 years in different institutions, and when you think about justice-impacted individuals and the programming, and I've worked with a lot of vice presidents for advancement, vice presidents for business and finance, we're not generally talking about these programs in a way that we are looking to personally fund. Generally, we're looking at these programs as programs that bring additional revenue to the school, because it's not the major population of students, right? And so, Allan, I'm gonna turn to you because I would like for you to talk about with the assessment tool that you all use in many of the institutions, and of course, I know a lot of the challenges that we had around data collection, relationships with, our departments of correction, et cetera, and going back to something that Erin said earlier about the importance of data and the use of data in support of these programs. Speak about those experiences and some of the challenges that we faced, and then some of the things that you all were able to do to help states and specifically institutions work through that.
Yeah, wow, that was a good pivot. Well, what I think about the most when I'm thinking about corrections and the challenges that lie there, and this will get to the data too. There's a couple things. We all get frustrated, rightfully so, with the correction system. I hate it. There are some good people that work inside of those systems that actually are educators, and there are allies in this work. The problem is they are tasked with running an entire school system that's the secondary school system, and so therefore don't truly have the capacity to do the work it takes to be full partners in this work with their colleges and community-based organizations in support of higher ed for the student population. The states that we've seen be the best partners have been ones where they've staffed up in that department, in that education department, and added additional staff that can take on the role of being a higher ed liaison, or the second chance Pell coordinator, or whatever they call it. It can't be, especially in the larger states, just the education director. They are running an entire school system of GED and high school programs and do not have the time to do this. So I want to start with that piece. So as much as we can do to advocate that corrections leadership prioritizes supporting the education departments and giving them the capacity they need to do this work. Attached to that, somewhat tangential, because it's a different department, but it supports this, is the data. They're working with such antiquated, like 1970s and 80s, maybe 90s systems. It's nearly impossible for them to track outcomes in a way that makes sense for this work. And without that, we can't then ask them to be looking at whether their programs are quality or not if they don't have the capacity and the systems in place to be able to even measure that, right? And part of that, but yet another department still, is technology, which there's an IT department, but it's driven a lot by security in that department, and everybody is so scared of letting somebody get on the computer, especially if it gets out to the internet. And so that's another huge challenge that we really have to overcome, and we have some people in this space that are trying to work on that and show there is a way to allow people access to information in a safe way where we're still maintaining safety with community or whatever it is, the rules that are in place. But That's what comes to mind for me, but I'll stop there. And, in case I didn't answer your question and you still have more.
You answered part of it.
Okay.
So the other part really does have to do with the relationship and partnership with the Department of Corrections. And you're talking about data at the institutional level, but then it's the whole data across the institutions to the state level.
Yeah.
When we're talking about outcomes and why should we invest in this and why should we spend the time, especially when you think about all of the things we just mentioned that we have to deal with in setting up truly efficient and effective and impactful programs.
Yeah, well, somebody mentioned it earlier or alluded to it, but the collaborative effort that's required for this work, state consortia can play a huge role in what you're getting at, is getting all of the partners to the table to talk about what is quality, what is success for us, and how do we measure that. And then now that we know what it is we want to measure, figure out how to get that information and who's going to collect it and evaluate it. One of the things we did in the project that Toya and I worked to get on together was, rather than in being part of a huge statewide consortium, bringing together a smaller targeted group of individuals that included corrections, the college, the students themselves, and created data working groups to get the key people from institutional research at the college sitting down with the data analysts from the Department of Corrections, and figuring out what information do you hold, which information do you hold, do we talk the same language, and that as a starting point. Let's get everybody at the table to talk about what information do we even have now, what information is missing, how do we get that?
So as we talk about this, how do we level set across the community and give information to help grantees with the process? You want to go, Barbi?
Pell specifically?
Yes.
Please, Barbi.
I think one is this thing. Yes, I think one, we don't do this in silos. Again, as we progress, we should be transparent with our successes, transparent with our shortcomings, and mutual aid. The spirit of mutual aid will go far in level setting across the country. Tennessee, again, has what I believe is an amazing system that has come from the statewide coalition, Tennessee Prison College Coalition, that was formed during the tenure of Miss Molly Lasagna as the executive director of THEI. Everything has come from that. So our PEP application has come from that. And again, this is not something that we keep to ourselves. We want to assist in replicating these successes across other states, not just in the South, but across states across the nation. Any of those successes, the navigating forward is, again, going to be shared nationally, not just with students nationally, but also practitioners. If a practitioner has this document in their hand, knowing that a student needs to know this, and this about a FAFSA, it will help administrators administrate those FAFSAs as well, again, in the student's best interest. So just sharing, very transparent. Sometimes we don't want to admit when we have shortfalls, but truly that's a learning experience, right? It's an opportunity for us to overcome, so just be transparent.
I think two things. One is a little bit of an attitude adjustment. I come from a faculty place. That's where I first engaged in the PAP work, was being a teacher, and then I became an administrator and learned there were other parts of the college beyond teaching. And when you have an institution like Department of Corrections, and you have an institution like a college, when we train our people to work in a college with a correctional institution, we tell them don't challenge the officers, go in, understand you're in their space, the humble, and you still have to do that to maintain your access on a day-to-day basis. But when you go to negotiate with the Department of Corrections as a college to establish a prison education program, I think we need to remember that while corrections is a massive, regulated, rule-based entity, colleges are massive, regulated, rule-based entities. You know that HEA she talked about? I can't pick it up. You ever tried to pick it up?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, right? Ouch. I mean, we have our own industry that is highly regulated, highly compliance-based, highly scrutinized, audited. And when we go to corrections, we need to make sure they understand that we too need to maintain the integrity of our profession. It's not a conversation you have with the corrections officer. But when you're talking to a prison to establish a relationship, don't go in with well, we just want to do a little bit. It'll be okay, whatever you want us to do. That's not who we are as an industry. We also have federal and state requirements to be able to do what we do. And so I think we need to remember that. And I think the other thing to remember is when we are administering aid to these students and talking to them about the aid they need, that it wasn't actually Pell that was returned to students. It was financial aid minus loans. Our students, when they complete a FAFSA, a number comes back. We're not going to talk about what the number is, what it means, any of that. But the lower it is, it signals to a school the needier the student is. So the lower the number goes. And you think 0 is the lowest number, right? I'm a mathematician. We like negative numbers. That number can go down to negative 1,500. And it doesn't mean anything in reality. What it means as a signal to the college that this is one of the neediest students in your student roll. And the neediest students are supposed to also be considered for something called FSEOG, which is a supplemental grant. Is your college doing that? Or are they saying, oh no, we're not going to use our little FOG pot for those, FSEOG pot for those students. We're going to preserve it for our campus-based students. Wait a minute. Who else is negative 1,500 SAI? Can we look at this? Look at the fact that there's nothing structurally blocking us. Well, there is some structural blocking. It's going to take a lot of work. But federal work study, is that a way to help start returning living wage inside? And so think holistically about what your students deserve, because they have the same rights any other student does, with a minor removal of the ability to create new loans.
So I am watching the time, and I have 2 more questions for you all. So it's been a year. It really has been a year. What do we know after this year? And then the second question I'm going to ask you is, and now we're going into a new year that will be under different administration. So I'm going to limit y'all, but I do want to know, what has this year been like? And then what are you preparing for in the new year?
I feel like I can go and then stop talking from a data and research perspective. We know little empirical information, little causal information, and that is not great. Right now, you could pull up the National Center for Education Statistics and pull up last year's high impact metrics for higher ed: enrollment, persistence, retention, completion. You can disaggregate by race, sex, first gen status for some, veteran status for some. We can't yet do that for this group of students, which means from a research perspective, we aren't able to make reliable claims right now about how we're doing in the aggregate. So if we go back to that map that Molly had, we can't, with a great degree of credibility tell you how many currently incarcerated students are enrolled right now. And that's a problem. And so I think the kind of small area of focus that our team's really kind of honing in on last year and this year is to try to answer some of these foundational questions, and short of answering them, building the infrastructure to answer them. And so some of our previous work, we've worked with some institutions here where we're working with your IR offices and we're working with your Director of Federal Student Aid to build those bridges if they're not already there. And so I think from a what do we know perspective, I'm a bit of a downer here. We don't know much that I could stand here and say with credibility confidently. I will say that what we do know and the opportunity that we're taking, what we know right now from any outcomes data is mostly from our criminological colleagues. It's coming out of corrections, it's coming out of criminology. And what we've been trying to do for the last 8 years is rightfully situate the study of prison education as higher education. These are adult learners. These are first-gen students. These are transfer students. These are students of color, these, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think part of the opening with Keith and Molly of integrating this group of students from a research perspective, that's also what we're trying to do. And so I will just make a quick plug. We are recruiting for a national longitudinal study, and we're looking to work alongside institutions that want to contribute to our empirical understanding. I think we have been such a resource-deprived community for so long that we've tended to kind of shy away from sharing, and one of the reasons that I'm just super proud and to be part of this is that we're now at a different place, and data are critical to being able to not just improve what we're doing, communicate what we're doing, and also ensuring that incarcerated people have the absolute best experiences that can be provided. So I'm biased in that regard, but I think that's how I would answer.
So, Sheila, from a DOE perspective?
It's been a very chaotic year, not necessarily because of us, because it's been chaotic with the Department of Education. Mic drop.
Literally.
Sorry, Toya. Anyway, what we do know, I think, finally, is the viability is there. These programs can happen. It doesn't mean they're really easy yet. It doesn't mean all the answers are completely crystal clear, but we know they can happen. And we're starting to understand how to scale. And that's not something we really understood before this year. And I think the other thing we know that we didn't know a year ago is who to call when we don't know the answer to something. I mean, I often don't know the answer to something. I was thinking the other day, I really ought to call Jenna and Rebecca, because what would be the right way to word this section to show these programs are leading to employability when they look like this? And I could call Jenna and Rebecca and get that kind of view. We did not have the community a year ago that we have now to help us answer those questions. We don't have to all know everything. And so to me, that's been a big piece of what we know we didn't know before.
Thank you. Yes, I'm coming down to you.
So all 52 oversight entities that we've worked with, which is all 50 states, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and Puerto Rico, have a process in place to vet and accept new PEPs. That was done prior to the 1-year mark of implementation, so June of this year. That means some of those were just put into place earlier this year. So that's that first bottleneck, to Barbi's point, but that process is there. All of the 150 or about 148 second chance Pell institutions made it through that first milestone, and now they're turning, hopefully they ought to be turning their attention to milestone 2, which a huge part of that is accreditation. The good thing about accreditors now that they've started to work their kinks out is the 10 accreditors that have some relation to the second chance Pell institutions also have a process in place now. And they're starting to be a little bit more uniform in what they're requiring. They want to know certain information up front before they get started, and so that's starting to work itself out too. Where there was a lot of variation earlier on, it's starting to flatten out a little bit. But they still have their calendar system. So schools really need to be working with their accreditation officers and the accreditation liaisons at accreditors to make sure they're mapping their process out to that calendaring system for new approvals or updates if you've already received an approval in the past. At Vera, we're now turning our attention to the BID, the best interest determination process, and getting corrections prepped for that. We will have a toolkit ready for the corrections field in July, right around the corner, and we'll then turn to helping all of them work with their partners to try to figure out how to implement that. The very first PEP that will need to be evaluated by their corrections system and with input from their stakeholders will be Cal Poly Humboldt, which will be fall of next year. So, aiming to have that done, but most of you know too that Vera is also winding down its focus on this part of the work, the second chance Pell and the PEPs, December 2025. So we'll be leaving a void in that regard that is crucial to be filled. There's still a lot of work to do and a lot of technical assistance work, and we're very interested in partnering with organizations and individuals out there to help build your knowledge and capacity over this next year so that we don't leave too big of a gap when we transition to other focuses. So I'll end right there.
Thank you. So I do want us to end with the focus on the learner. And so, Barbi, if you could share.
Sure. So what do we know from the student perspective? We know that it's been a year, right? We have that info. We know it's been a year. We know that states are strengthening their processes. We know that there is movement in states such as Kentucky, who we haven't really heard. There's movement in the great state of Texas, and if Texas moves, we all move, right? That's right, girl. So from the student perspective, we know that there are, at least in these, even if we call them small successes, there are more seats for more students to receive more education, more services, and we can celebrate that. What we also know is that DOC didn't ask for this responsibility, right? So over this year, we have seen relationships being forged out of necessity, not of choice, but of necessity. And I think this has been a productive process. If we look at the strengthening of states, again, we have to talk about coalitions. Coalitions are a monumental force in this PEP arena. And as long as your coalition is one comprised of those who can make decisions that directly affect students, and if your coalition has that student experience, not just centered, but at the front, and those student voices are heard, for instance, on Tennessee's PEP application review panel, we do include, there are alumni sitting on that panel who will be reviewing PEP applications going forward in Tennessee. So we have a strengthening relationship with some of those stakeholders. We have a strengthening relationship with students, with alumni throughout this process. And this has been a very boots on the ground process. What we're getting from the top in policy, et cetera, Erin has talked about, we don't know an awful lot. But what we do know an awful lot about are the steps that we have taken thus far, the grind that we have entered into thus far. Looking forward to next year under a new administration, I have to give credit where it's due. Shannon Ross in the back. He's in the back. Everybody stare at him. He has some amazing ruminations on the incoming POTUS and what we are looking forward to as a field. Follow him on social media. Thank you, Shannon, for this morning's enlightenment. But one thing that Shannon says is we have a lot of work to do. We have always said in this field, we have a lot of work to do, and we've done a lot of work, right? Pell is here. Pell has been a year. But we have a whole lot of work to do just in this arena, and now we have this added layer. God knows what this layer is truly. One of the things that we know to expect from this coming administration is that we have no clue what to expect. So with what we have gained in strength thus far in this year, just being on the ground doing the work with students and with practitioners, I think what we can grasp onto at this point in not knowing what the next 4 years is going to bring in our field is that power that we've created through these partnerships. And I think these partnerships really wrapped with the bow of student perspective and student experience is our strength, and is our strength that's going to carry us through whatever this next 4 years looks like. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I'm saying we have the strength, we have the tools, and we've always had a whole lot of work to do. Let's just continue to do it.